Yes, I am.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
I mostly just do the filming. Not really
as you
much
can see
into
on the
that.
table over here, I have days that changed the world. So the last time, remember, I brought records from history. It's a great feats that were achieved in all of history. But today I bring to you days that changed the world. Individual days that, going in and going out, the world was made anew. Or at least the event that happened would reshape the future for years to come. So of course, before I start, you need to take it with a small pinch of salt, because naturally events in history take a long time often to play out, and sometimes such a sudden events that would warrant being on the greatest days that changed the world, sometimes themselves took many days before in the making. But nonetheless, I thought it'd be interesting to go back in retrospect to see individual days that changed the world. So let's start with the first one, going all the way back to the 15th of March, 44 BC, represented to you here by the Roman gladius. Any guesses as to what this event is? The Ides of March. Do you know if you got well done, well done. Does anybody know what happened on the Ides of March? Caesar, yes, well done, yes, assassinated. Ah, good. You know your history. I thought you were barbarian. So yes, the 15th of March, 44 BC is known as the Ides of March. This was the day that the Senate assassinated Julius Caesar. And of course, it was also Brutus who helped spearhead that. And he got the Senate angry with how Julius Caesar had taken too much power of the Republic and corrupted it. And Caesar essentially was a tyrant, a dictator, even before Augustus and the empire. And so, of course, the Senate was angry with how he was gripping all the power. And so, on the 15th of March, they murdered him as he did a speech in the Senate, taking him to the side and stabbing him over 50 times with daggers. So yes, well done. Did I have a question over here?
The little girl at the back.
Question, yes. I'll explain to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from early all the way to late, and we'll do it very soon. Did you have another question?
I did. I think in my son and I went through Rome. It was a spot where
Murdered. So we do know where he was murdered. He was murdered in the Senate. So it would have been in Rome, in the Senate building. So maybe it was that spot that you found. Wow.
Everyone
What an
knows
honest
that.
being there. Oh, one day I'll go there. Right, so next on the list, the crucifix. Good Friday, circa AD 33. Anybody know what happened over there? You especially, my Christians, you know, 33 AD, Good Friday in the Bible. Oh yes, crucifixion.
Oh Christ, yes.
These crusaders are smart. I saw that regret in making my soldiers kill you. So yes, my friend over here is right. This is the crucifixion of Christ. So some people say, did it happen, did it not happen? We have to look to the Romans, and the Romans had very meticulously documented Christ's existence. So we do in fact know he existed, and he was a man. And we know that it was on a day round about AD 33. The exact year is not quite precise. We know it was when Caesar Tiberius was on the throne of Rome. So on Good Friday, 33 AD, Christ, of course, was hated by many for proclaiming to be the Messiah and to being the flesh form of God sent to the earth. And so this mostly, in his own religion, the Jewish community who he was born into were angry with what he was saying. And so the Jewish community wanted to execute him. The Romans, of course, having a grip on Judea and having governance over there, didn't want this to start a rebellion. They were very worried that this could all start a lot of disaster for the empire's grips in Judea. And so the Romans mediated the whole event and decided that they would allow for Christ to be crucified, as long as on his cross it says King of the Jews. And many of the Jewish community back then were angered by this. They didn't want, they believed many of them, he ordered his execution, didn't believe he was the king. But nonetheless, the Romans put that on there. But it would be his followers that would subsequently keep his word alive and write what is now known as the Bible, forge in Christianity. Christ followers, Christianity. And so that's a bit of the history of Christianity right there. A day that changed the entire world. So yes, So, ladies and gentlemen, next up on the list. Oh wait, I swapped these two. Sorry, my friends. That is a bit better. So you're probably wondering what is inside here. This is a day in the 9th century AD. The day is actually disputed. Nobody knows exactly when, but it was some day in the 800s. Anybody know what that represents? Yes? Actually, Prophet Muhammad was born in the 6th century. This is a day in the 9th century. I'll give you a clue. The clue is what's inside of it. So, ladies and gentlemen,
Tobacco.
on a day in the 9th century, a bunch of Chinese monks were busy experimenting on trying to create an elixir for life. An elixir that would grant immortality. They accidentally invented gunpowder. So yes, well done, well done. This was the invention of gunpowder. There are some sources that say even during the Han Dynasty, there was an alchemist experimenting with chemicals with gunpowder properties, but very disputed. It's more or less settled on the gunpowder, the 800s in China. And of course, gunpowder eventually spread, and the Chinese would first use it as ways to celebrate fireworks. Eventually they weaponized it into rockets. It was not only until the late early 1300s that gunpowder would reach Eastern Europeans. And eventually Europe would get gunpowder in the 1300s, and that was the birth of the gun. The first ever hand cannon. And all because of those Chinese monks doing experiments trying to create a life elixir back then. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is gunpowder. So don't bring any cigarettes near there, please. All right, next on the list. 29th of May, AD 1453. Anybody know what happened over there, represented by the bassinet helmet? Sorry? Fall of Constantinople. Give Fern a hand. That was very good. Well done, Fern. On the 29th of May, AD 1453, it's true, this is when the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople. So Constantinople, some of you might know, was the capital of Turkey, but the Ottomans, when they captured it, renamed it to Istanbul. And so Istanbul is still the same name today, and it's the capital of the country Turkey. So if you think about it, the year 1299, as I said, you know, events that change history have roots in their own history. So we go back in time to 1299 is when the Ottoman Empire began, when Osman I forged his Turkish empire. And so fast forward many, many, many years to 1453, and the Ottoman Empire is a force to be reckoned with. And they decided to go on a conquest of the great capital of Eastern Rome, the Byzantine Empire. And they, after a long siege, captured Constantinople, renaming it to Istanbul. Did you know that many strange future machines? I think I'm a bit scared to go to the future. Anyway, so, where was I? Oh yeah, it's the Ottoman Empire. So many historians argue that 1453 is the date of the end of the Middle Ages. Some of you wonder, when was the medieval period and when was the Renaissance? Because those are the two periods next to each other. Many argue, and I think I agree, 1453 is a good date to sort of cut the end of the Middle Ages. That was the birth of a new era where it is now an Ottoman-dominated Eastern Europe. So a day that changed history. Right, ladies and gentlemen, the next one on the list is right over here, the 18th of June, AD 1815, represented by that cannon. Anybody have any guesses to what happened over here with the cannon in 1815? The first cannon was made. As I said, with gunpowder, the first cannons were made all the way back in the, China, back in the 10th century. But that's a good guess. Thank you. You suggested Waterloo. Yes! Fern again, well done. Right. No, the history teachers can talk. Brilliant. I'm not the only one. Yes, the Battle of Waterloo. 18th of June, 1815, Napoleon strikes back. So if you think about it, during the days of Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars, this great dictator of France became emperor in 1804 and decided to go on a conquest of Europe to create France as a dominant power that would control all of Europe. he was successful very nearly, except if it wasn't for those British, those crazy British. Napoleon never conquered Britain. And so, come the fall of Paris, 1814, he was exiled all the way to Elba, a little small island south of Europe. But Napoleon, after 8 months, escaped Elba, and he returned a grand opening. The soldiers of the King of France, who was reinstated into power, got his soldiers to take aim at Napoleon and to stop this insurgent from coming and causing trouble again. His soldiers put their muskets down, shouted, "Vive l'Empereur! Long live Napoleon!" Napoleon was back. And so in 1815 he planned a final plan to crush the British and the Prussians. And it so happened that as he marched north to the town of Waterloo in Belgium, this is where fate was decided. So in the early morning the assault was launched. Napoleon very foolishly kept a lot of his reserves waiting and waited to press the attack all the way until 11 in the morning. His generals advised against it. And because Napoleon postponed the attack, the Germans, led by Blücher, could come in on his flank. And eventually, at the end of the day, in the evening, as the sun set, the battle was lost for Napoleon, surrounded by the Germans, defeated by the British. And so Napoleon was forced to leave his empire once again. And he was finally exiled to the island of St. Helena for good until he died 6 years later in 1821. So yes, the Battle of Waterloo I included in Days That Changed the World. If you think about it, remember the Norman performance with the French knight? You remember my knights, how we fought those British? That was the beginning of what is called the Anglo-French divide. And for nearly 1,000 years, the British and the French were to fro, fighting each other. And Waterloo was basically the end of it. When France was finally kicked out, new government, this was the end of that great divide between the French and the English. The day that changed the world. Imagine, if Napoleon had won Waterloo, we might all be speaking French today. Oui. Oui. Nah. Wellington won, so we speak English. So, next on the list, we go forward in time to the 7th of March. Oh yes, thank you for pointing that out. Thank you, that's another historian. Sorry, we actually skipped on the 12th of October, AD 1600. Thank you, yeah. I nearly didn't see it under this. Anybody know what happened on the 12th of October, 1600? Represented by the Reichsrat? Sorry? Oh, sorry. 21st of October. I read it backwards. Yes, the 21st of October. Anybody guess? Any ideas as to what happened? It's you with this hat over here. Okay, I know that's a tough discovery. Maybe a few centuries late, a few millennia. So this is the Battle of Sekigahara. So in Japanese history, this is when the great shogun of Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu, defeated the enemy, and this is a great change, a great day in history, where the world wasn't the same. So it was even since 1599. Think about it. Feudal Japan was run by what we call shoguns. They were basically militant dictators, and they would gather their clans and fight other clans for dominance in the regions. And a certain shogun named Tokugawa basically, what was I saying now? Tokugawa basically assembled his army and created a great dominance and fought many battles, and one of the biggest battles was the Battle of Sekigahara. Sekigahara was a big change in Japanese history, and Japan would never be the same. And I thought I'd represent it with the only piece of tie that I have from them, my right side. Many of the soldiers back then would wear these into battle, firing their muskets with their right sides. So yeah, they would have used these in the Battle of Sekigahara. Thank you for spotting that. I would have gotten to it back. So next on the list over here, now we go all the way to 20th of August. Oh yeah, what did I do without you guys? That's why I have an audience. Sorry, yes, the 7th of March, 1876. Finally, now here we are. Any guesses as to what happened over there? 7th of March, 1876. The telephone. Yes. Yeah. And any other guesses after her? Yes.
When they decided to stop wearing helmets and start wearing hats.
Actually, you are only about 4 decades ahead. It was World War I when they did that. So very close. Yes, you're very, very right. This is the invention, when Alexander Graham Bell patented his telephone invention. And that was the day that changed the world. No. No, these are very separate, you will see. Is that better? Anyway, so on that day was when Alexander Graham Bell got his patent at last. He'd been applying to the American government to patent his invention of the telephone. And even years before, the French had invented a crude telephone already in the 1850s. So the exact invention is hard to say, but the reason that I've chosen the 7th of March, the day that Alexander patented his invention, this is the day it was made official. And now with the patent, he could sell it, and this is when it became commercial. And this changed the world. Monarchs could now communicate much more easily. People could now phone. Human gossip could happen a lot more easily. So, well, yes. So I thought I'd include that represented by the typical fashion of the 1870s bowler hat. The bowler hat slowly phased out the top hat. The top hat came out already in the 1700s, late 1700s. Come the 1870s, bowler hats were all the talk. People who wore them were called city gents. So yes, Alexander Graham Bell is alleged to have worn one, I think. Many people who were around them wore that suits. All right, finally, now we can get to know. So over here, the 20th of August, AD 1977. Any guesses to what happened then? Yes?
Glasses were invented.
Glasses were invented. Not quite. Yes.
Tim Berners-Lee launched the internet.
Ooh, very close, but actually the internet was launched in 1989. Yes, 1989. Oh, did it?
John Lennon was murdered.
I don't remember that in change.
16th of August. Elvis
So-
died on the 16th.
1977.
Yes, because it was my friend's birthday.
Oh, really?
And she was an Elvis fan.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley died on that day, and he famously wore these glasses. No, it's not Elvis. So what happened on the 20th of August was the launch of Voyager 2. The Voyager program was a space program aimed to explore the gas giants. So back then there were no pictures of Jupiter, no pictures of Saturn, no pictures of Uranus or Neptune. The closest that they had was through the telescope, crude images through telescopes. So come the 20th of August 1977, NASA launches its Voyager program, a daring program aimed to send 2 probes on a long voyage through the solar system to visit each of the gas giants. Voyager 2 was launched first and Voyager 1 was launched afterwards, ironically enough. It should have been the other way around, but it's just launch dates and angles of trajectory that they would visit. So yes, that's a day that changed history, because now, ever since the data gathered from the Voyager program, we know so much more about planets in the solar system. And we now finally know in high HD quality what the gas giants look like. Yes, question?
Why is it glasses?
Typical fashion from the 70s. These are basic, more or less the type of glasses they wore back then. These big, thick glasses. I use it, so ladies and gentlemen, when we get to the project much later, you'll see my 1970s outfit and I'll be wearing these. That's enough of a spoiler, alright? Question?
So when I got my glasses, they said, the lady said that glasses are now made out of plastic like the lenses, and they used to be like actual glasses. Is that how I'm guessing that's
Okay. So yeah, I'm not an expert on the history of glasses, but what I do know is I've actually seen some old drawings of Victorian sunglasses. They're these very crude, small little frames on little wires. Interesting, hey? And I think maybe even the 1700s they might have had spectacles, but that is where I get blurry, so don't ask me. But yes, they were made out of glass. As to whether they're made out of plastic nowadays, maybe, yes. Any one of the glasses wearers over here, are they made of plastic? They're plastic.
Mine are glass.
So a mixture of glass and plastic. Yes,
It's lighter weight
makes sense.
and safer.
So it's not glasses, not Elvis, but the launch of the Voyager program. All right, next on the list, the 26th of April, 1986. Chernobyl, well done. Give her a hand. Well done. Very good. Would you like to explain Chernobyl?
It was a terrible, it was caused by lack of sleep.
Yes, well, there's a good point. All right. So yes, the Chernobyl disaster happened on the 26th of April, 1986 at 1 in the morning. On that early morning in a power plant in Ukraine, which was by then part of the Soviet Union, the nuclear power plant, the Vladimir Lenin power plants, basically powered most of Ukraine. And so in that early morning, they were deciding to do some experiments. Even the day before, they were doing experiments. And ironically enough, they were safety experiments to try and see if the power plant could run at lower power levels. So what they did was they would switch, fiddle around with the power levels and try to see how it functions. Everything got out of control. Come early morning, the temperature was raised way too high, and it reached the point of no return where the steam was now very, very hot inside the nuclear reactor. Basically, water goes in to cool the nuclear fuel rods, and the water was now too hot that the water was evaporating. And basically what happened was all of the steam and heat eventually could not be contained and literally blew a hole in the roof of the power plant, releasing tons and tons of deadly radioactive particles into the atmosphere. And it's just ironic how it was a safety experiment, and literally the fallout of the disaster was immeasurable. Eventually, a few subsequent days, the cloud of nuclear gas was detected in Sweden at a few power plants. And they were like, something's wrong here. The Soviet Union was keeping it a secret. And eventually this cloud kept spreading all across Europe, and the Soviet Union could not keep it a secret anymore. And eventually it was known that the Vladimir Lenin power plant in Ukraine, Chernobyl, had blown up. And the repercussions changed history. This is one of there had been a few disasters before. Think about it. Nuclear power plants were first invented in the 1950s. There were a few minor accidents, but the Chernobyl disaster was the biggest of all. There's a meter that measures nuclear disasters from a scale of 1 to 7. Chernobyl is on 7. There's another disaster that fell on under 7 as well. It was the Fukushima disaster in 2011. But we'll get to that later. Anyway, so I included this in Days That Changed the World because ever since then they began to now realize that nuclear fuel is potentially very dangerous. And everyone changed their safety principles and protocols, and the type of nuclear power plants used at Chernobyl were now illegal. They couldn't use those type of power plants. And the world changed forever after Chernobyl. And to this day, the city's abandoned. Maybe you'll see Chernobyl later in my outfits, but we'll get there. So, ladies and gentlemen, last on the list, the cell phone, 11th of September 2001. Yes, I heard. Any other guesses? Shh, any other guesses? Any other guesses?
First one was made?
Sorry?
First one was made?
Not quite. Yeah, I like that guess though. Good, good. Yes?
Twin Towers?
Twin Towers, yes. Right, so on the 11th of September 2001 is known as 9/11. This was a day when the Twin Towers in New York were attacked by an extremist group called Al-Qaeda. And I included this day in Days That Changed the World because quite literally going before 9/11, going after the world changed. And there's such a thing as historians call as pre-9/11 world and post-9/11 world. And so what happened was 9/11, just like I said with many of the other events, have their own history and their own roots in years prior. You have to go back to 1989 to the end of the Soviet-Afghan war when the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. And many people fighting the Soviet Union were angered by this. Many of the fighters formed the Mujahideen, which was a group of fighters who resisted Soviet control in Afghanistan. And the Mujahideen were supported ironically by America against Russia. And so what happened was the Mujahideen eventually beat out the Soviets, and one certain Mujahideen fighter named Osama bin Laden decided to found his own group called Al-Qaeda. And as the subsequent years progressed, he was angered by the US's interfering, especially with Israel and Palestine, how America kept trying to help Israel against fellow Arab nation Palestine. And so Osama bin Laden was angered by this and founded Al-Qaeda. And eventually plans were drew to attack the West, as it was called, to attack America, the heart of capitalism and trade, the World Trade Center. And the plans already go back as early as 1998, was when the first idea was proposed to bin Laden. And so come the day, that fateful day, the Twin Towers in New York were attacked by airplanes controlled by Al-Qaeda. And like I say, it's a day that changed history. And I think in light, to link it again with our performance at the Crusades, did you know that President George Bush, when he invaded Afghanistan a month later in response to 9/11, he's quoted to have said that he called it another crusade. And Osama bin Laden is believed to have accepted this as a challenge. And it's not set in stone history, but there's apparently a source saying George Bush was heard to say this. So I find it just fascinating. Fascinating. How you look at all of history, and as I call it, it's called era leakage. How eras leak into the other eras. How we're all bound to the past. And as we see this ebb and flow between Islamic Caliphate and the Christendom, this ebb and flow has been happening for many, many centuries. And even till modern times with 9/11 is another, you could almost say, the 10th Crusade. And I find it just fascinating to see this, and this is why I do this, because if we don't understand the past, we don't know where we come from. And we're almost cutting off this ebb and flow, this being chained to history. And by understanding the past, we'll be able to learn from the old ways. And this has been Days to Change the World, everyone. So thank you so much. Oh yeah, yes, question. Yes.
You answered my question.
Oh, did I answer your question while I was fit? Okay, great. But yeah, the Pentagon was also attacked. Yes, true. Like I say, it's just been a brief little summary, because a lot of these things I will do in the subsequent Stone to Steel Act. It's just been a small little sample.
Why
Yes.
the assassination of Caesar? Sorry, I know it's probably betraying my ignorance, but why would there be a day that
Why is that a day that changed the world? So if you think about it, Rome was, like I say, before the Ides of March, and after, you can almost say a post and pre-era. How the whole world, well, the whole of Rome changed after that. So you think about it, it was murdered by the Senate. And then the Senate would go on to form what is called the Caesarians, and they would go against all of Caesar's policies to undo it. A civil war ensued. And of course, Mark Antony believed that he needed to stop this, and Mark Antony took the helm and fought against them. And so it's very messy, but basically Rome changed forever. And this was the first taste that Rome really had of a true dictator. And it would only be a few years later, until 14 BC, where Augustus Caesar was made emperor, and he officially made Rome a dictatorship by turning it from the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. But this wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been tested out by Julius Caesar. So that's why I found included Caesar's death is important to a piece of history that changed Rome, and hence Rome changed history, and hence it changed today.
I would have included Franz Ferdinand's assassination just because of the class, like so having like people who'd been in service fighting in the trenches with, well, obviously the officers were always of a high class, but just
But the birth of communism, birth of
yes, I mean
yes,
the
yes,
20th
yes.
century was.
So naturally, I didn't want to keep you all day. It's already getting late, so I had to leave out a lot. I was very sad to do. There was another one, like I had to leave out the moon landings. I had to leave out the founding of Constantinople. I had to leave out so many countless days. But yes, I would have included the 28th of June 1914, when Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. Yes, it was World War I. It changed the world forever. And going in, the world was very much as it had been in the old Napoleonic ways. Would it be soldiers lining up, going into battle, marching to glory for your king and country, going out. You've got the birth of the Soviet Union, the death of the Ottoman Empire, and democracy also got a much bigger stand by America.
You know a lot of
creating
trivia.
the League of Nations.
You should join him. And there's also a very good song called 𝐇𝐢𝐬𝐭𝐨𝐲.
Led to
I think I've heard of it. I think
I felt also I had so many events from the 20th century I wanted to
like I
include
think
a
that
few.
COVID would have been.
I could have included, although
pre-COVID.
was it a single day? I guess they could have chosen the wave 3.
Close on the day, the 23rd of March.
Or that dreadful day on the first one, yeah. Anyway, but thank you, ladies and
Thank
gentlemen.
you very, very much.
Thank you for coming. I hope you
Thank
enjoyed
you,
it.
that was fascinating.
Great, thank you, cameraman.
Thanks, go and get.
Yay!